Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We're glad to have you with us. You know, the playoff is set. We gave you all our initial thoughts on the rankings when they came out. But setting aside the sort of general quibbles, we have 12 teams, and today we're going to look at the 12 different paths that are out there towards the championship. But before we dive in, let me remind you that you can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. And you know what? Let me also remind you that Sean has not seen the movie The Program. I mean, I just, like, we were just talking about this right before we went in, and I honestly had to fight laughter at this because it is, yeah, I'm older. I am older. I was in high school when The Program came out, so that was like a big thing for, I think, every high school team went out like as a group to see it. But I think it and Rudy are two of like the classics of college football, like moviedom that most people should watch. But so have you seen Rudy at least?
Yeah, I have seen Rudy. But here's actually really the thing. So I want people to understand, right? Look, when people post mean tweets about me not knowing anything about football because my name is Shehan J. Raja, that's not true. What is true is that my parents did not show me very many old American movies, and it was not high on their priority
list. Old American movies.
You
have made me feel like a creaky old man. I feel like I'm dissolving like the guy who drank from the wrong cup at Last Crusade. Indiana Jones The Last Crusade.
If I've seen like a movie from before my time, a lot of them were because they were like played at school or like, you know, like on a day off. So like, again, like, I don't know. It's like kind of a bit, but it was true. Like, would I have ever seen Remember the Titans if not for the fact that they played it every single time that there was a substitute teacher? Like, I think I saw Rudy at school. I'm trying to think what else I would have seen at school.
Yeah, I was curious how you saw Rudy. Like, to me, I'm like, so you saw the Notre Dame propaganda film, but not the movie that's actually satirizing the sport in general, or I wouldn't say satirizing, but making observations.
I don't think that the program was as big as Rudy or Hoosiers. I'm just going to be honest with you there.
I'm just saying, if you get a chance, see it. I'm recommending that anyone who listens. It's such a fun movie, and it's timeless fun. I mean, everyone knows the meme if you're in college football, Latimer, the guy who's smashing like a first string, and smashing a window with his head. But to see it in its full context really gives the glory of that particular character. But anyway, I mean, we're getting far afield. I just, when we had that conversation right before we went live, I'm like, whoa, but an old American film, my goodness.
From before my time. That movie came out in September 1993. I was born January 1994, just for some timeline there.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, we were just having this conversation. Like, yeah, I didn't see I wasn't around when The Godfather came out, well, at least 1 and 2, but man, all right. I did see 3 in theaters, but okay. All right. We should get to this. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about the, obviously the seeding, the initial seeding this past week. Obviously we had the controversy. We talked about it on our Sunday episode, with the idea of SMU passing Alabama, although I think both of us are fine with that. Again, no matter what, when we're talking, the 12th seed, the 11th seed, the 10th seed, to be fighting for those positions, something went wrong for your season at some point. We're not dealing with what Florida State was dealing with a year ago when they were boxed out. But we can set that aside. I think what we've really got an opportunity here, though, and we touched on it a little bit, is to look at the paths that each team has towards winning a national championship this season. And that's fantastic that we have 12 teams that have a chance, some better than others, to make it all the way through. I mean, usually the joke, obviously, we'd have at the beginning of the season is all 134 teams have their shot at winning the national championship. And going into the season, they truly did. Because if you were even the G5 team, you could fight your way in. Now, the one question, I mean, kind of going into this, we're not going to go into predictions. We're not going to say who we think is going to win each first round game. We'll save that for next week. But we want to just kind of, again, look at the paths available to the teams out there, knowing that, again, for those who, just to kind of reiterate, the seeding of the number one team basically set up almost everything on who went where for a lot of the subsequent quarterfinals and semifinal games. So we already have there's going to be some interesting travel involved. There's going to be some interesting, some teams are not staying in their region. I mean, I really can't wait to talk about SMU's route in this. So there's a lot of factors that we could put in here. So all of that said, I thought maybe we could start. We're going to break this down into two groups. The first four seeds, to talk about them, you have to talk about all the teams that are going to have to eventually fight each other to face them. So we're going to save them for the latter half. That makes sense. So we don't have to be kind of reiterating ourselves. So instead, we're going to go and start with a reverse order of the 5 through 12 seeds, starting with, of course, number 12, Clemson. What are your thoughts on the path Clemson has in front of them?
Yeah, I mean, if you're Clemson, obviously, like, you're the 12 seed. That's going to come with complications. You're going to have to win a lot of games. I think you feel okay about your path, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think that going on the road to play Texas, and Texas will be favored in this game. Texas should win this game. But, like, I don't think that you're just, like, quivering in your boots over playing Texas with the way that they've been playing the last little bit. Now, I will say, this has not been an especially great Clemson defense. That's probably the thing that I think is most concerning, just big picture, about a game like this. But, like, I think that Clemson has the ability to make something happen. Like, it would not shock me if Clemson were to win this game. And by the way, if you do end up in a situation where you win this game, like, things all of a sudden become really, really interesting, right? Because then you get to play 4 seed Arizona State. And again, that'll be a tough game, but I don't think an impossible game by any means. Then you start getting into the whatever 1 seed, whether Ohio State takes them over, that's fine. But, like, I think that if you're Clemson, this kind of worked out pretty well for you. One thing that I always point to is that there are certain teams that, like, if you are an average to above average team, you're in a situation where, like, you might just not be able to hang, right? I think of, like, again, I mean, think about, like, that Liberty team, right? Like, that Liberty team could not hang, and I'm not not comparing Clemson to that Liberty team, but, like, there's also a level of team where, like, okay, you're good enough to hang with top teams, but you're also susceptible to lower teams, if that makes sense. And I think that Clemson is right in that in between, right? Where I think that they can hang with a Texas and et cetera. Now, look, they did also play Georgia in week 1. That went really, really poorly. But I think that with the results that we've had for both those teams since that opening game, like, week 1 is just something that happened, man. Like, week 1 is just a thing that happened. I don't put too much stock in what happened in that game. Now, I do think, again, Texas is better than Clemson, but, like, I think that this path is pretty okay.
It's interesting. I think the tough, well, I don't want to say the toughest game, but of all the first 4 round games, the opening line for this one is the highest. It's a 2 score line at this point. I think it could change, of course. There's a lot of things that can happen the next week, but I think right now Texas is favored by like 11. But there's a couple of factors there that I think you've touched on. Number one, Clemson's looked better. That SMU game proved that okay, they're better than what we were concerned about, which is were they a team that would look great feasting on inferior opponents, and then when they would take on a challenging team would lose, like obviously what happened with Louisville, what happened with South Carolina, in addition to that opener with Georgia. But that gave a moment of okay, looks like Dabo's team is getting a little bit together. And that was partially something where when you have a team that Dabo creates, where it's more old school, it's not really relying on the transfer portal at all. Teams coalesce and maybe get better late in the season because these young guys are actually getting to where they need to be. So that is a factor. The other factor is also Texas. And we talked about it last episode. I think they're overrated in a little bit of ways here. Now, granted, they look better than they had in the previous game against Georgia, but Georgia, I don't even know what to make of Georgia. I mean, Georgia, we saw the previous week go into 8 overtimes with Georgia Tech. Again, no disrespect on the Yellow Jackets, but this isn't the Georgia team that we were used to in previous seasons. So I do wonder. I'm not saying the SEC as a whole is overrated, but I am concerned that we have two particular teams here that may be a little bit overrating each other just because they had a tight performance at a stage where maybe they're both wavering a bit. So I think Clemson could certainly get past that. They got a good draw in that not only is it Arizona State, but it's the Peach Bowl, which is closer to them. So I don't know. I'm sure. And one thing I do want to say, I mean, we talked about this again in the last episode. Obviously, Boise State was the 3rd seed, so they got the Fiesta Bowl before the team in the same city as the Fiesta Bowl could actually get it. So that sent Arizona State across the country. But at the very least, they get first go at tickets. They know they're going to that bowl, so we'll see how much. I'm very curious to see some of these quarterfinal bowl crowds to see if we're going to see more of those first 4 seeds, or is it going to be a geography factor in there? And if it is, Clemson certainly would be one to take advantage of that. Now, whoever, as we said, the pod that ends with Oregon and the Rose Bowl, whoever comes out of that's going to probably be a tough one because you've got Ohio State, Tennessee, and Oregon. Those are any of those 3 come out of there. That's going to be a heck of a Cotton Bowl. But at that point, with those 2 games behind them, we'll get a good sense of this Clemson team. We'll get a good sense of, was it just that SMU had a bad game, or was it that neither team is particularly good? Or, is Clemson a team that's rising and peaking late in the season, like we've talked about? If we have a team that does that, you could have a surprise. I mean, frankly, Arizona State might fall into that category. But that's a wonderful thing right now. We have a fresh playoff. We have really honestly no idea. I mean, we have ideas of who could win, who probably has a better chance of winning, but there is no team in this group, as you mentioned, that feels like last year's Liberty, where everyone was like, okay, it's, do we have to put them in? I guess we do, knowing what was likely to occur, and that did. The haters were right. Good call by the haters on letting Liberty in last year. My goodness. So moving on, though, the other ACC team is, of course, the 11th seed, SMU. They go on the road to Penn State. Then they get the winner of that game will go on to the Fiesta Bowl to face, Boise State, which some have argued might be the best route through, mostly because, again, it's assuming that, hey, it's still just a G5 team, but it is Boise State, whose only loss was to the number 1. And then they would go through the Orange Bowl on to Mercedes-Benz. What do you make of this particular path that SMU has? Is this something now everyone's saying Penn State has a better route here, but do you think SMU has a good opportunity to, well, frankly, they go into Beaver State. And I also would love to know, is Beaver Stadium the hardest one to start with as a road team?
Well, that's a good question. So, I mean, with this game, I believe this one's the noon game on Saturday. So I do think that it helps that you're not getting the night game. So the 4 stadiums that we're looking at, right? We're looking at DKR in Austin, which, by the way, I did a story on projected weather for those games 2 weeks out. Obviously, look, we're doing weather more than 10 days out. Like, things are subject to change, but it's kind of fun to get a little bit. Yeah, and it's everybody says, oh, don't like the weather. Just wait 10 minutes. We get it. Every single place on the planet has that saying, but you're in that. So there's the Austin game, which is going to be very temperate. Like, it's going to be like high 50s, probably. Pretty beautiful. Good if you're Texas or Clemson in the middle of December. The other games that you're looking at Ohio Stadium with Ohio State. You're looking at Beaver Stadium with Penn State, and you're looking at Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend. So 3 legitimate cold weather games. The one that I had seen that had the highest chance of precipitation was actually the Notre Dame Indiana game. It doesn't seem like we're going to get it in State College or in Columbus. But I will say, too, Penn State versus SMU features the team that probably is most ill-equipped to deal with the cold with SMU. Like, Tennessee, it would also be up there going to Columbus, but one, Columbus doesn't get the same kind of cold as State College, and 2, I mean, there's more access to the mountains, there's more cold coming through Knoxville than there is through Dallas. Although I don't know, I'm absolutely freezing right now. It's like 51 degrees outside out here, so I don't know. So we might have to bundle up to prepare for that. But seriously, I think one thing too, and I'm gonna be fascinated. I don't know if this has been asked of Josh Heupel as yet. I'm really gonna be curious. does Tennessee find some way to use the mountains to help prepare for the cold, right? Because they're right next to the Smokies. That would be a really like unique way to try to approach it. I don't know if they're going to do that, to be clear, but that would be an interesting way to do it. I don't know how you do that at SMU. Like, I don't know how you prepare for this. And by the way, it's one, Texans, and two, a lot of kids who transferred in from Miami as well, who played for Rhett Lashley before. So like, it's a whole roster of guys who aren't necessarily about the cold. Now, again, the fact that it's going to be the afternoon game, the fact that it's supposed to be pretty clear outside, I think those things do help. I don't think that like the weather is going to destroy SMU and decide this game, but like I do think that it is going to matter a little bit. So the question that you have about Penn State versus SMU's path is kind of down to how do you feel like SMU matches up against that Penn State defense? Because when I look at SMU, they have as much playmaking in the backfield as almost anybody. Kevin Jennings is just like one of those guys who extends plays, makes things happen. They got a running back in Brashard Smith who is a converted wide receiver from Miami. And so like I'm intrigued about that versus Penn State's defense. I think they're going to be able to attack the edges and downfield a little better than people think. So, but at the same time, like when you look at, let's say, the 4 lower ranked teams that you're playing, I think I'd probably take SMU over Indiana. I mean, I was kind of vocal that I felt like they should be the 10 seed and Indiana the 11. But like, I think that if you're Penn State, like you're glad you don't get Tennessee or Clemson most likely either, just because again, they've been here in this moment and the way that they match up. If SMU pulls the upset, though, they get Boise State. I think Boise State's a little bit of a weird matchup for SMU. You're looking at the winner of Georgia versus Notre Dame. That's obviously not the most ideal, I think, if you're SMU. But just for a second, I mean, let's think about this in two sides of the bracket. If you are, I think that this side of the bracket, the one that has the 6-7, is a lot more manageable than the 5, 8, 9, 12 side of the bracket. One, because I think that you sort of wonder about Georgia without Carson Beck, and they've been kind of inconsistent this season regardless. They're the 2 seed. They're really good. I want to be clear, but like they are way more gettable than they've been the past 3 years. And like you do have SMU. Penn State is a little unproven. Boise State obviously is an interesting matchup. We're kind of waiting to see on Notre Dame. Like, I don't think that there's, and of course Indiana's in there too. I don't think that there's anybody, and like there's a chance that Georgia just blows through everybody. But like, I don't think that there's anybody that you're looking at like, whew, I am like really not happy about having to play this game.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing about this bracket. As we said, it is such an inconsistent year. There isn't a team, even Oregon, which is, of course, they got through undefeated, but it's not like they didn't have some close games with decent opponents in their own conference, as well as a couple of teams, including Boise State, that are in this bracket. One thing I did want to note, and this is something that I wonder as this season, I'm not worried about it because I think fans are just excited. They're going to spend money. I know the cliche for SMU is they're all loaded there. Although I do want to clarify, not everybody's a billionaire there. Like there's usually, you only need a couple of really rich people to fund something as crazy as, buying your way into the ACC. So the reason I bring them up though, let's say it had been another team. Let's say it was, I don't know. Let's say it was Cal somehow in this situation. And Cal is not known for spending alumni. Let's say they had gone to Charlotte, just like SMU, because we're going to assume SMU had to fly to most of these places. Most fans, they're not going to drive. Flew to Charlotte. Okay, you lose that game, fine, but you went and you supported the team. Now you have to go to Penn State, one of the most expensive road games there are. Not because the stadium tickets are actually the cheapest right now of the first 4, because the hotel rooms are prohibitively expensive. Even in a normal season Saturday, a big Saturday, it can be up to $1,000 for a room. Now they're all over $1,000. So I know people who cover games there in the media typically stay, actually, if they can't get a room rate, they stay like a couple hours out of town. But even then, let's say you somehow do that. So you're only spending a couple $100 per ticket. You're maybe getting a hotel room. You found one that's in the $300 or $400 range. Plus you flew out to, as we've heard James Franklin talk about how hard it is to get out there to whatever random airport you flew into. Okay, fine. Let's say you win that game. All right, now you get to fly to Phoenix to get a ticket to the Fiesta Bowl. And by the way, all the Boise State fans had been going hard on those tickets already. They know they're going. It's their magic place in the BCS era. So they're going to be buying up those tickets. And then let's say you win that game. All right, Miami, you're going to buy a ticket to Miami. I can't wait to see what the prices are going to be like. Again, it's a bigger city. And then the finale, you have to buy yourself a ticket, probably fly again to Atlanta. And then I already know how bad the hotel rates are there compared to it's so funny because I have a barometer. The media rate for the Peach Bowl versus the media rate for the Mercedes-Benz the same stadium a couple weeks later. Wow, you didn't think they could double it, but they can for the same hotel. So I'm just thinking, like, I know there are rich SMU fans, but there is a limit. And I wonder, are we going to start to see, is SMU kind of the canary this season of there's going to be a team that's going to be stuck with, now I know the easy caveat is like, yeah, well, they have to get through these rounds, but there's a potential there for some fans to just go like, I really want to support this team, but I got to like mortgage something.
Well, I think the bigger thing with SMU is like, just again, we kind of have talked about it before, right? The sheer quantity of fans that there are, just because it's not a very big school. And I mean, yeah, like I think that a lot of SMU fans will try to make this Penn State trip though, because there aren't any others that are guaranteed. Like
Right.
I'd like this might be like the last game of this super historic season. And I think SMU will be highly regarded coming into the 2025 season, but there's no guarantee that they pull this off again and make another playoff, right? Like it's hard to do this. No, it will get more interesting the further that you go. But and again, like I think that like we saw the ACC title game, like it wasn't the most fill arena in history, and it definitely was a Clemson lean, and Clemson had a huge advantage with of course it's happening. I did have someone ask me like, is it possible that we at some point get conference title games back on campuses? Like you see in some other places, because then at least like there's a little bit of an implicit sort of like consumer base, but then again, then that's a huge advantage, of course. So it's going to be really interesting, but I'm fascinated to see how SMU shows up for this team. I know that when you looked at some data, like I think you kind of alluded to it, right? Like the Penn State SMU game is the cheapest by far of the home games at this point. According to some StubHub data, the first round game, Penn State versus SMU, $103, and Notre Dame versus Indiana, $775. So it's gonna be a different kind of challenge.
It is, and I gotta say, because I've been to a game at Notre Dame where I just stayed in Chicago. Like it's not that awful of a drive to get to and from. So my goodness. So now moving over to the 10 seed though, Indiana. We've talked about them, kind of almost forgetting them, but their path is again similar to obviously the SMU path in the sense that they're going on the road to Notre Dame. If they make it through that, they get Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So again, that's of course the SEC tie-in. Not as ominous had been the Peach Bowl, but still, it's going to be probably a very strong SEC biased audience there. And then if you make it through that, the Orange Bowl and Atlanta. Does Indiana's path seem feasible?
It's it's pretty tough, man. It's pretty tough, if I'm being honest. The thing with Indiana too, again, I kind of mentioned the teams that like are kind of in the middle that can punch up, but can also get caught from below. I'm a little worried that Indiana's on sort of that lower tier of like can beat teams that are half a step above them but can't go all the way up. We saw that, of course, against Ohio State. Now, Ohio State might just be awesome, right? Like Ohio State might just be incredible from a roster perspective. They obviously find ways to lose games, unlike any team that I've seen in a while. But like they crushed Indiana, and I'm worried with this Notre Dame matchup that it's going to look a little closer to that. Like I think that Indiana, if they play. I mean, it's tough to even find exactly the team in the playoff that they definitely match up well against. So, maybe you're talking like, I mean, I think that Oregon in some ways is like the more normal sort of comp for like a team that's really good up front, but not like you can't do anything against them, right? Like Arizona State would probably be on that list. SMU might be on that list. Boise State, I'm a little on the fence about, but like Notre Dame to Georgia, that's not what you want to see if you're Indiana heading into the playoff. I just think that you look at this Indiana running game and passing game against Notre Dame's defense and the playmaking that they have and the physicality that they have, and then having to go play Georgia if you win that game. It's just two back to back that I really don't like the matchups in.
Yeah, I think a lot of their excitement is just going to be about playing Notre Dame again at Notre Dame
Yes,
Stadium, the
yes.
State of Indiana Championship, as some people have dubbed it. That will be interesting. That'll be fun. But yeah, I'm not very optimistic about that. The other team that we should probably touch on, especially with these, obviously at least before the break, Tennessee is the other road team. They're going to Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. The winner of that game gets Oregon in the Rose Bowl, which, again, that's one of the conference tie-ins. Even though they changed conferences, that was the traditional tie-in for old and new conference for Oregon. Then if they can get through that, you get the Cotton Bowl from the winner of the Arizona State quadrant. And from there on, again, Atlanta. The Vols, well, I mean, really, it just starts with how do we think we'll do if on the road, and is Ohio Stadium going to be just a hostile environment for everyone? Like, I actually don't know, like, how it's like, don't take it personal, Tennessee. That's now become a hostile environment for literally anyone walking in that stadium after what happened in the last game.
Well, I'll be curious to see if Tennessee brings any flags into the stadium, but this path, and really, I mean, I think that we can kind of take this discussion to just like this part of the bracket. This part of the bracket sucks. It's Ohio State, Oregon in the next round, and then obviously Tennessee out there. I think that Tennessee is in huge trouble. I think this is a terrible path. I think it's a terrible matchup. I think that they have almost like no chance of making it out of the first two games, probably less chance than almost anybody on the entire board, save maybe Indiana. And like, look, and I've had some people say like, oh, well, like, we should have predicted this, should have projected this, like Ohio State, they're so underseeded. How, like, I mean, look, we run into this problem with every sport. Like back in the early to mid 2010s, like the San Antonio Spurs were just like not playing top of their potential for entire seasons because they were trying to like protect their stars. So they'd come into the playoffs as a 4 seed or whatever, and then they go beat everybody because they're awesome. You can't like insulate yourself from that. There's nothing you can do to protect yourself from a team that's really good not having a great regular season. So I don't know. I think that that's just kind of the reality of like playing sports to some extent. But this, I mean, I don't like look at these two games. Like, does Tennessee have the potential to score any points in this part of the bracket? Like, this is so hard. They managed to have to play Georgia earlier, who's like pretty good defensively, and then said, what if we took two of the only defenses in the country that are clearly better than Georgia? Like, not even close better. And by the way, if you make it through those two games, you're playing a better defense maybe than any of them in Texas. So like this is a disaster. I think that Tennessee is in huge trouble.
Tennessee, and we've talked about this before, did get some. They're, I think, a poster child of how your fortunes can turn in those final several weeks of the season. As we've talked about it in previous episodes, after that Georgia loss, we basically said, all right, they're going to be the ones outside looking in because unless a lot of teams start losing, there's no way they're getting in. And then luckily for them, a lot of teams started losing. And then they had a UTEP game that was absolutely, a complete cupcake that they beat 56-0. And then Vanderbilt, which is good, but it's still Vanderbilt. And they were able to take advantage of that, somehow move up to, again, number 9. I'm not really huge. I don't have as big of a problem of the fact that Ohio State got ranked ahead of Tennessee, only because I really don't know what Tennessee got lucky by what happened ahead of them in the last couple of weeks. All I keep thinking is this is a team, their best win is Alabama, and Alabama was obviously not good enough to get into the playoff this year. I'm saying that semi-facetiously. Please don't come after me, my friends of the not the Rolling Tide. What am I even saying? Right. But
I'll say it, by the way, they were not good enough to get in. Anyway, you can move on.
But all of that said, I do wonder if we're going to suddenly see a dose of reality of like, oh, right. They before they played these two kind of weaker teams, they weren't that good before. We know what they're good at. We know they have we're hoping next season we'll see a bit more from that offense. But yeah, this is going to be an ominous game. I wonder if how low of a scoring game we'll see in the path that Tennessee has before them, if they even get past Ohio State. Although I don't think Oregon will have any trouble with that kind of defense, with any defense. Oregon can put up points. Only question is, can you put up more points than them? Because of all the quarterbacks, and we'll probably get into breaking those down in a later episode, like Dylan Gabriel is the closest you can get to consistency in all this group. You know you're going to get some good decisions and some good movement. Even if he's not going to win the Heisman, he's still one of the better quarterbacks out there. When we get back from this break, we are going to take a look at the teams that are hosting, as well as the top 4 seeds, as we kind of figure out paths on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, so we had a chance to talk about the 4 teams that are going to be on the road in round 1. Now let's take a look at some of the hosts. So we might as well just take the other side of this particular game we were just talking about, because again, we go from Tennessee. Now we're looking at Ohio State. So Ohio State, they host Tennessee, of course, and what's going to be a very potentially testy environment after not only, it's not like Ohio State had a game in between their when we last saw our heroes, they were getting into a fight with the victorious Wolverines on the same field that they'll be playing next week. Now, if they can get through that, again, we get a rematch, the one we thought we were going to get in the Big 12 title game up until that final week of the regular season against Oregon. And then if they can get through that, a Cotton Bowl date, and then to Atlanta. We've talked all about Ohio State's talent. Do they have that enough to get past Tennessee? And I think as we've said before, they certainly have the depth to get through some injuries. Some teams don't, but they have the depth where even if some key people go down, they can probably maintain the talent level close to it for all 4 games. But do we think this is a path for them that will allow them to take full advantage?
Yeah, it's a weird setup for them, obviously, like because they are playing the number 1 seed in the second round. But like, and look, if they win the title, and for people who have read CBSSports.com, at least my initial take was that Ohio State is going to win the title. They're going to earn it. Like, they are going to have to earn it. They're going to play Tennessee in round 1. Now, I think people are getting a little, we just talked about it. I think people are getting a little over the top of being like, oh my God, like Oregon might have to play Ohio State or Tennessee. Well, yeah, one of these things is not like the other. We do not have to sit here and pretend that Tennessee is anything other than a normal 9 seed in this tournament. But you play Tennessee in the opening round, and it is one of the better defenses in college football, even though I think that they won't be able to hang. But then you get Oregon, the undefeated number 1 team. Then you get potentially Texas. Obviously, Clemson and Arizona State will have something to say about that. And then if the bracket goes through, you're probably playing either Georgia or Notre Dame. Maybe you get Boise State. Maybe you get Penn State, SMU, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's hard. That's really hard. You're going to have to play 4 games in a row with teams that have the ability to hold you underwater. The other thing, too, we've talked about it all season long. They're down 2 of their top 3 offensive linemen, with Seth McLaughlin and Josh Simmons both out for the season. Now, I do think it's a benefit that Ohio State, like everybody else, will get all these extra weeks of practice. I imagine that most of their practices are going to be spent repping a lot of offensive line, trying to get some of these underclassmen even ready. And this is actually, I mean, just to go on a slight tangent for 1 second, like, this is a dynamic that I'm very interested in, is the idea, especially I'll even point out specifically for the teams that have buys, like, you basically get a whole sort of spring practice schedule to like get these young players ready in a way that you can't during the season. So like, I mean, I think about a team like Texas, actually, where they're down so many running backs. Well, like, you get a whole camp essentially to get to maybe try out some young ones. Now, Texas doesn't have a bye, but like, I think that's still a dynamic that you keep an eye on. Georgia, right? I mean, Gunnar Stockton going to have essentially a whole month to get ready for the college football playoff. So I think it's going to be a really interesting dynamic if teams are able to take advantage of that. But Ohio State again, like they're going to have to earn it if they make it through. This is a pretty tough path.
The shifting gears, Ohio State, tough path. Let's talk about a team where we've already talked about their opponent as having one of the toughest paths. Notre Dame. They host Indiana. Then they go, if they can get through that, they go on the road to the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. I always think of, wow, Notre Dame against an SEC team in a BCS. Like I just think of every other time Notre Dame's been in that position. But I'm not going to project that that's going to be what's going to happen. But if they can get through Georgia, Orange Bowl, Atlanta, Notre Dame, it seems like it's interesting too, because it seems like you think they have a better shot at beating Indiana than Penn State does with SMU. And granted, these are both everyone's one seed within one seed of each other. And some of it is a little arbitrary. We're just trying to talk about we're almost talking tiers here. Does Notre Dame have potentially the easiest path? Also knowing that, as we mentioned, Georgia is probably not going to have Carson Beck. They don't have their punter, which, I mean, I'm not saying that facetiously. That can be really important, especially if you're playing a defensive battle against a team with a good defense like Notre Dame. Is this path easier than people may even realize?
Yeah, some of it depends on what Georgia you think you're getting, but if you think you're getting a slightly diminished Georgia, but I think that ultimately, yeah, probably you're going from Indiana in the first round, which is a game that you should be favored in by a lot, a team in Georgia that I think will still have a first time starting quarterback out there for whatever you want to say. And also, I mean, I've been on the record about this all year, a team that I think is pretty flawed offensively right now and is not as good defensively as they've been the past 3 years. You look at a lot of their defensive metrics, they are much closer to the middle of the SEC than the top, like they've been. And then, like, again, the other side of the bracket, you're talking Penn State, SMU, or Boise State. I think that those teams are pretty manageable. And like, that's your path to the title game. Like, it's again, this is 100% a Georgia conversation and how tough you think they are. I was, by the way, messaging with one of my friends who covers Georgia, and I asked him because I did a story today where I ranked the 24 most impactful players in the college football playoff. I kind of cheated. I put in a 25th because I tied actually two of Boise State's edge defenders because I just do that. I asked my friend, like, who's kind of the guys that you need to keep? Who are the guys that you need to keep an eye on at Georgia? I kind of was like, Trevor Etienne, Jalen Walker. There are a couple guys that you can consider. Michael Williams, Malachi Starks, of course. And he was like, "Nah, I mean, like, like if you want to be really real, like Brett Thorson, our punter, was a huge deal for this team. Like a really, really good player. He was an All SEC performer. I was actually surprised he only got third team. I thought he would have gotten second or first team. To be quite honest, he's out for the season with a knee injury. Like I think that matters in a game that could be really, really low scoring. Imagine in a Georgia Notre Dame game if you have a shanked punt from Georgia and Notre Dame only has to go 54 yards instead of 78. Like, these are the margins that decide college football playoff games. And so I'm not going to sit here and say like that beating Georgia will be easy because obviously it won't be.
No, yeah.
But like, I think if you're Notre Dame, like this worked out pretty okay for you. I said heading in, I felt like they should be the 5 seed. I think that you probably like being the 7 seed in this scenario just a little bit better.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And again, so much of it is the chance you get of potential injuries, also which team's hot, which team's not, those intangibles. And it'll be fascinating to see again how that extra week of prep will benefit some of these quarterfinal teams. Not necessarily prairie. Obviously, the first week is almost certainly like, let's just get everyone healthy, let's get conditioning. And then, once you see how these first round games go, you can then start prepping a little more specifically for them. But it's going to be utterly fascinating to see how these break down. Now, the last of these host teams or probably not the last, but the next team we wanted to talk about is actually on the other side of this particular bracket, Penn State. Now, we've talked about the fact that they've got SMU and potential weather factors in there. I do love, by the way, the idea of training in the mountains. You made me think of like Rocky 4, where they're like in Siberia and you see Rocky in the mountains, like in the snow, carrying like lumber and chopping wood. Now I'm imagining, football players in Tennessee doing that, in the Smoky Mountains or something like that. But Penn State, if they can get through SMU, who they're of course hosting, they get one of the weird games out there. I mean, yeah, it's Boise State, but you're playing Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. And of all the places to play Boise State, I don't know if I want to play them there. I remember one time they had I can't remember who they played in the Peach Bowl. It was a preseason game. I think it was a Chick-fil-A Bowl, and they got absolutely blown out. But Boise State's an unpredictable one. This is a team that beat a team, or actually had almost a similar game. I mean, how similar? I didn't really think about it. How similar was Boise State's game early in the season against Oregon versus Penn State's game at just last weekend, also against Oregon? I mean, they both got close. But not quite. So that may or may not be an easy game. And then you got the magic voodoo of the Fiesta Bowl. And if they can get through that, of course, the Orange Bowl, whoever probably wins between Notre Dame and Georgia towards the national championship. This is a Penn State team that showed a lot of life last week. Do we think they're getting a hot hand? And is SMU, again, going from 1 to 11, just an easy enough opponent? And I don't want to say they're easy, but just a level of difficulty down where Penn State can get their bearings and get through them and move on to the next round.
Yeah, I think that Penn State should match up decently well with SMU. Again, when you talk about quarterbacks and when you talk about playmakers, Kevin Jennings is up there with any of them, right? Like he is up there. I mean, I'm trying to think back to Penn State's schedule a little bit. Of course, they play Oregon in the final week. They play Will Howard during the regular season, but I think that Kevin Jennings, as an individual player, is better than Will Howard, at least. I'm looking up and down. I mean, Miller Moss is fine. I don't think. I'm looking up and down the schedule, man. There's not a whole lot to be impressed by when you talk about playmaking quarterbacks, because you're talking West Virginia with Garrett Green, Bowling Green, Connor Bazelak kind of torched him a little bit. Illinois, I mean, they're not bad with Luke Altmaier. It's just not a lot to be impressed by. And so I do think that outside of Dylan Gabriel, who dropped 45, I think that Kevin Jennings is probably the second best quarterback that they faced. And this is an SMU offense. If you give them space, they're going to take it. They're going to put up points. I'm curious too, though. And again, I do think the weather will factor into this just a little bit. I do think that Penn State rather has the ability to probably bowl over SMU with their running game. But SMU is a really disruptive team. They're actually number 2 nationally in sacks. They have 51 sacks on the season. No one else in the playoffs has more than 40. That's how disruptive they are. So it'll be an interesting matchup. But if they survive that, I think that they match up pretty well with Boise State. They're just really good up front. I think that they're good at gang tackling. They scheme really well. And then again, you get into the Notre Dame Georgia side of the bracket, but I don't think that either of those teams also are totally unbeatable either. So it's a reasonable path, but it's one that's really tricky. And I'll also say too, playing SMU and Boise State in the first 2 rounds, and actually I'll even throw Notre Dame in there in the 3rd round, hypothetically, those are 3 games that if Penn State loses them, and they could lose any of them, they're not going to feel good about it. I think it'll feel different if they're well, we lost to Georgia, we lost to Texas, we lost to Ohio State or Oregon. We can live with that. But if Notre Dame comes out and beats them, I don't think that they feel great about it. If Boise State or SMU beats them, you're pressing the panic button, even though these are 2 really good teams. So that's the one piece of danger, is that it's manageable, but I also don't know whether it'll feel good if they lose these games.
Yeah, I have to admit, though, I am intrigued by the idea of watching Penn State against Boise State, only because, especially at that point, I believe the Heisman will be done by then, but then we'll really get a chance to see Ashton Jeanty against another really good run D. And we'll see again, how does he do against putting a bunch of really talented guys in the box? I mean, that's going to be what must-watch TV for a lot of fans, I think, like all of these games. And that's, of course, the New Year's Eve game. So one last first-round game, first-round team to touch on. Texas hosts Clemson. We've talked about it a bit. It is a little bit funny that Clemson is the 12 seed, not usually the program we expect to have been in this position. It's not Liberty of last year. It's a team with the pulse that just pulled off an incredible, okay, they almost pulled off a spectacular upset, and instead it turned by skin of their teeth upset in the ACC title game. But if we see the Clemson that started that game, I'm curious to see what goes on there. But it's still Texas at home. Now, granted, they were at home against Georgia. We saw how that went. But do we think that this particular Longhorns team under Sark is in a position to really lock it down and make it through Clemson, Arizona State in the Peach Bowl? Just kidding. I still love that they're in the Peach Bowl. And then to play what would probably feel like I don't care who gets out of that bracket. If they make it to the Cotton Bowl, if that does not feel like a Texas home game, something is wrong in Texas. Like something is wrong. And then you get into the national championship game. How good should Texas fans feel about their path here?
Yeah, I think they should feel really good. Like you mentioned, potentially a home crowd if you make it to the Cotton Bowl. I am planning to be at that game. That should be a lot of fun. Either against Oregon or Ohio State or Tennessee. So on top of that, like Ohio State is probably the one that you're most scared of, actually, from a crowd perspective. Oregon, I think that they're going to probably a lot of tickets will be used on the Rose Bowl, I'd imagine. And then I'm sure a lot of people will buy tickets to Atlanta. I think that the Cotton Bowl might be kind of that like in between where you're like, we're not going to waste our time with that one. And if you're Texas too, again, like the matchups aren't bad. We talked about it. Clemson could be tricky, but this isn't a team that's played well for most of the year at the same time. Arizona State is fascinating. And by the way, for people who don't know, Arizona State has, I believe, 9 former UT players on their roster. Like they have a pipeline of Texas bounce backs because partially because of some staff members that they have. And like, so they will relish the opportunity to play in this game if they get the chance. The headliner of those is Xavier Alford, their first team All Big 12 safety, who is just a really great player. So they would love the opportunity to play against Texas, but I do think that Texas, I think they maybe have some better players. The next round is where it gets up, of course, interesting when you get like, I think really one of the toughest teams in the bracket before, of course, potentially making it to the national title game. But it is good for you that you get the Cotton there. So I do think that this is a pretty manageable path. I think that being the 5 seed is a reward. Now, I think at the same time, like we've talked about it for the past few weeks, I don't want to overrate what the reward is, right? Like I think that still having to play Clemson and Arizona State and then get the winner of Oregon, Ohio State, Tennessee, like that's not great if you want to go win the national title. But I do think that overall it is more manageable than not.
I think that's a fair assessment. Now let's jump over to our top 4 seeds, the ones that get to just sort of wait and see who survives that first round. We'll start from the number 1. So Oregon, again, they get whoever wins Ohio State, Tennessee in the Rose Bowl, which is at least, that'll feel about right for Oregon teams. They've been in the Rose Bowl many times before. And then they would go on to the Cotton Bowl. I don't know. I'm not going to predict who they're going to get, but we just talked about that. Could be Texas would be the odds on. Well, all right, I'll say it. Texas is the favorite. I know Arizona State, all respect to you, but if we're talking straight leading, they're the favorite to win.
Well, they're higher ranked. We can acknowledge that they're higher ranked, even if obviously Arizona State's a higher seed.
So you're probably going to run into Texas or maybe Arizona State. We'll see, which again would be funny because then you get a Pac-12. People, then the stories are just going to write themselves. It's a Pac-12 Cotton Bowl. But but so I guess that gets in. And by the way, if Ohio State gets through, it is a classic Big 10, Pac-12 Rose Bowl. But anyway, that would be funny if Oregon keeps getting these sorts of games. But in terms of their path, though, do they have one of the harder paths of the top 4 seeds because they have to open with the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee for potentially playing a Texas and then whoever again in the national championship game?
Yeah, I'll reiterate again, get Tennessee out of my face. They are not the same thing as Ohio State heading into that game. But
Are you going to say
Like,
Ohio
Ohio
State is going to absolutely win like he did against Michigan? No, sorry. I just there's no chance for Tennessee.
No. I mean, Ohio State could lose, but if Tennessee wins that game, then that's just a normal matchup for Oregon. Like that's just like a normal first round or a second round game if you're Oregon. If it's Ohio State, we can acknowledge this is one of the top 3 most talented rosters in the sport, and probably the best roster in college football this year. That just decides not to play like it for reasons that remain inexplicable. But I think Oregon, like we can acknowledge, Ohio State being lower seeded versus their talent throws off the bracket. Like it just does. It's all Ohio State's fault. It's not the system's fault. It's not the structure's fault. Like it's Ohio State's fault. They ruined it for everybody. But because of that, if Oregon gets Ohio State in the second round, this might be the matchup between the number 1 and number 2 team in the country in terms of quality. Like we could be talking about that in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. I was even telling some people, like, the thing for me too is that I feel like if Ohio State wins that game, I like Ohio State matching up better against Texas than I might Oregon against Texas. I think that Ohio State would really be able to cause Texas trouble in the run game and make their offense one-dimensional and run into issues. I think that Oregon will probably be able to outscore Texas, and will certainly be disruptive, but I don't think that they're the same level of shutdown defense that Ohio State is. So really, picking the winner of this game kind of picks the national championship in some ways for me. But I do think that if Oregon wins that game, again, it's a tough matchup for them too, having to go and play at the Cotton Bowl potentially against Texas, and if not against Texas, against Arizona State, which is also closer to the Cotton Bowl than Oregon is, and should have a higher turnout, I would imagine. Now, Oregon has more fans, but it's not such a huge gap that I think Arizona State would probably have the slight advantage in that stadium. And also, they know how to get here now too after playing in the Big 12 title game this year. So, I mean, Oregon really does have one of the toughest paths in the college football playoff because of the way that things work out for them. I think that they can handle it. I think they're good enough. I think there's a chance that they make it through and are still able to win the national championship. And again, look, the other piece too is that if you're Oregon, they are really, really good. But like, again, they're still in the process of building their extreme championship level talent. Versus an Ohio State, versus even, let's say, a Georgia or Texas. I think the fact that you get your 2 toughest games in the first 2 rounds, like that's also not the worst thing in the world for you, as opposed to maybe having to play a 3rd game that's your hardest game of the entire season, which I don't anticipate that it would be. Now, again, maybe Georgia gets rolling and that changes, but that's not what I would anticipate. So it's tough. It's definitely not ideal if you're Oregon as the undefeated 1 seed. But again, if you win the title, you're going to earn it.
Let's actually stay within this kind of semifinal bracket, like jumping to the 4 seed Arizona State. If they manage, because again, they're going to get the winner of Texas Clemson and then the winner of that Rogues Gallery we just talked about. Do they have the toughest path right now of the 4 seeds, of the top 4 seeds right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for them, right? Because they do play the top at-large team in their first game. Then they played the number 1 overall team, most likely, in their second game. It is tough. And like, we knew this going in, right? We knew that obviously whoever played the top at-large team would not be in an ideal situation. That's even, again, like Arizona State, of course, was fortunate and I think deserved to get a first round bye. But that's why there was so much Arizona State versus Boise State talk too, because the difference between the 3 and the 4 is pretty massive when it comes to how your bracket shakes out. Because of the way that
let's also be clear. Before that last kick in the ACC title game, this was a question of who was going to be the 12, probably the 12th seed versus the 4 seed, or at least in Boise State, maybe the 10 seed. And so I think that conversation got changed very late thanks to what happened with Clemson. And Arizona State was just, because before that we were just talking, does Arizona State even deserve a 4 seed? Now they are a 4 seed. And they're looking at who they've got across from them, and we're kind of like, this team wasn't ranked 4. They were
Yeah.
seeded 4. And is
Yeah.
that putting them in a really, because I don't think, honestly, I really don't think this is what people anticipated heading into this first version of the 12-team playoff. We thought at worst it might be a 6th ranked team that gets the 4 seed, maybe, but not a team that was,
Really, I think that for me, it was always. I thought that the top 3 would probably be in the top 6 or 7. I did think that the 4th champion had a chance to be like 11, 12. That's not a huge shock to me. Now, I mean, look, Clemson ended the season at number 16. That's, I mean, I think that we thought that a group of 5 champion maybe would be in the 16 to 20 range. It's kind of a shock to see a power conference champion that was number 16 make the college football playoff. Now, we kind of got the offset of that because Boise State ended up being so good. And but I think that the 4 buys being in the I, I would have maybe said 10. I think that 12 is a little lower, but I think that I'm not surprised that it's like that it's in the 9-10 range. And I think that it is also at least legitimately helpful that the 4 buys at least are in the top 12 and would have been projected to make a 12-team playoff in any system. I do think that helps a little bit, but no, I mean it is obviously interesting seeing this disconnect of a Texas team which ranked number 3 in the final rankings against an Arizona State team that ranked number 12 in the final rankings.
And then opening against a team that was ranked number 16 in the rankings. You know, I have to say, going back to what we were talking about just again with sort of the fan choices, it's like Arizona State fans, I know you didn't get put in the same town as that you're actually in, but I mean, maybe worth investing in going to Atlanta for this one if you're going to pick a game. Like if you're going to experience the quarterfinals or the college football playoff, it's best to buy your tickets to this game while you can before the other team really knows if they're going or not, because the odds are this may be it. Now, I'm not saying, I mean, again, you're a hot team. You've obviously been going on, you guys destroyed Iowa State in a way I did not entirely anticipate. But, you know, this is a tough one. Now, we're getting a little low on time. I would think we'll just kind of get through these last 2, of course. Other bracket, let's start with Boise State. So we've talked all about this. They're going to get the winner of Penn State, SMU, and then the winner of presumably Notre Dame or Georgia. How good are Boise State's chances to get through this? Do we think that, unlike Arizona State, where they kind of had to jump up, Boise State was still fairly close to getting up there? And some people might argue that they just were stuck with the teams they were faced playing. Do we think after that strong performance they had against UNLV, that they're in a position where there's any reason to be confident about their chances at potentially getting through those rounds?
Well, one thing I do want to point out, and I've spoken about this in previous seasons, is I think that if you are not a recruiting superpower, I think that Boise State understood in the second half of their season, their goal was to win. How they won didn't really matter that much. Just win, just stay on track. Obviously, just do enough to get Ashton Genty to New York. But I think that was kind of their only goal. And I think that when you look at their performance in big games, that's more what you should take from it when you're projecting forward. People are going to point to the Wyoming game, the 17-13, where Ashton Genty gets hurt. I'm personally not all that bothered by that because I think that there are only a select few games that if you're Boise State, you're kind of trying to go all out because you don't want to have guys get hurt. You don't want to ruin your depth because you don't have as much depth as everybody else. And I think that what happened in the Mountain West title game kind of helped with that perception a little bit from me. They go up 21-0 at halftime against UNLV and basically just hang on to win. This is a defense that when they're playing well, they are super disruptive. They have 2 guys, like I mentioned, that combined for over 18 sacks on the team. They have a defense that has the ability to put the clamps on when it matters. Again, Oregon scored 37 on them, but it was a tough 37 too, right? It was a tough back and forth game. They needed a last-second field goal. They needed, by the way, a kickoff return as well.
Special teams.
Yeah, actually 2. Sorry, it was a punt return and a kickoff return in that game, just to score all the points that they did. So I think this Boise State team is legitimately very good. And now, look, against Penn State or SMU, would I have them favored? I think that I could see it against SMU Penn State's going to be a little tougher, but I also kind of think that these matchups are okay for them. Like I kind of think that I think for Penn State, that's not an offense that I think scares you a ton. I think that it's a quarterback that you can get after a little bit. I think that their passing game becomes a little focused at times on Tyler Warren because they don't have great wide receivers outside of him. Now, the question for them is going to be, can they stop the run well enough to give themselves a chance against Nick Singleton and Katron Allen? And with SMU, it's like, can you stop the playmaking? Can you limit the big plays? That was an issue at times for them, but I think that Boise State certainly has the ability to hang with these teams. When you get into the next matchup, Georgia or Notre Dame, I mean that's a lot tougher. That I think is a little bit of a tougher matchup. But I mean Boise State at the Fiesta Bowl against the top team, like I don't know. I don't think that you should count it out.
Now, Georgia will wrap up with them. We've talked about it a bit. They were obviously down a couple of key players. Do they have enough in the tank and with Kirby Smart at command and kind of guiding them through this to get through that winner, presumably Notre Dame or Indiana, and then whoever gets through that other group we just talked about? Because it really, do we think this is a good path for them to potentially be a national champion?
It's fascinating, right? I go back and forth about this Georgia team because they've been so flawed at so many different times this season. You know, you look at even the advanced numbers, right? They historically, the past 3 years, have been like 1 or 2 the entire season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're in like the 7-8 range right now. When you look at SP plus FEI, when you look at some of the total numbers, like they're in the 30s and 40s on defense. Like these are things that you don't see from a Georgia defense. These are things that you don't see from Georgia over the past 3 years. I think it's getting a little taken for granted what they did last season. And they managed, of course, to win the SEC and come from behind against Texas. But Georgia's clearly a very good team that's capable of winning the national title. But they are so flawed. They are so flawed right now. I don't think that they have any receivers who cause you a whole lot of pause. They're starting to find their tight end game a little bit. Trevor Etienne is like the one playmaker on offense, especially with Carson Beck out. But I don't know if you can win a national title with one playmaker on offense. I mean, you're going against Notre Dame. You're going against one of Penn State, SMU, Boise State. You're having to play, of course, whoever comes out of the other side of the bracket. I don't know. I mean, this isn't a bad bracket for them, but I think they probably do get Notre Dame in that game, and I kind of don't like that matchup for them. This is a Notre Dame team that I think can grind you down. They're obviously super talented on defense. I've been just astonished with their depth is honestly the biggest thing because they lost multiple players on the offensive and defensive lines during the season, and they just replaced them with another fantastic player and kept on going. So to refer over to College Football Insiders, which obviously we love their projections. The final projected score of this game between Notre Dame and Georgia is Notre Dame 25.65, Georgia 25.23. With Notre Dame with a 51% win probability. So that's the kind of game that you're talking.
I mean, at this point, why not go 3 for 3? Georgia.
Georgia's a killer when you get to overtime. But I will say too. I will say too. I think that Riley Leonard has a lot of Haynes King to him. And I think that if you're Mike Denbrock, their offensive coordinator, you are repping option stuff all day long heading into this matchup. And I don't know if Georgia is a team that you trust to deal with it. Now, they're going to be much better coached and probably will anticipate some of that because of how much Riley Leonard runs. But, oh boy, I don't know about all that.
All it took was a slight scare from UMass, and then Georgia's been shook ever since. Since then, 9 overtimes in 2 games. Can they add more? I mean, I want to see them actually hit some kind of weird statistical record of number of overtimes over X number of games. I don't think anyone's ever done that. Like overtime series, that would be fantastic. Well, that was was fun to kind of look at all these paths. Again, it's intriguing because none of these teams seems completely doomed. They'll get some more ominous than others, but there are chances for upsets. There's chances for having to rejigger all of this, depending on who actually makes it through that first round. It would be really weird in this season of all seasons if all the favorites won each game, because that certainly has not been unless you're Oregon, it just hasn't been that way all season long. Well, want to thank all of you for listening to us. I want to thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show. He's Shehan J. Raja. You can find his work at CBSSports.com and at Shehan J. Raja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hayeri, part of the group that runs Reddit's CFP. Thanks for joining us.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.